so much of the projection just involves things that are outside of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s control. Yeah, he can be winning. Like you said, when you're charting him, he's winning in this capacity, but he's not getting the ball. What is going on, Sharp Football family? It is your resident Swami of Konami, Rich Hribar. I am joined by the true alpha target in the fantasy space, the paterfamilias of wide receiver knowledge. You know him from Reception Perception and Yahoo. He is the great Matt Harmon. There's one player that I know you charted as a rookie. You're probably going to get into the full, usage of that he had in year one. And he was maybe a little bit of a disappointment based on expectations. And that is Marvin Harrison Jr. going into year two, a player that we drafted at you and I individually, but the collective we as the fantasy community, like near the round, 1-2 turn, taken fourth overall in the draft. And before I even share my opinion, I want you to not just walk through Marvin Harrison Jr., the player, and was he an actual disappointment as a player or not?
Yeah, I think it's all relative to expectations, which as you highlighted there was overinflated. Yeah, there was one league where I did take the plunge on Marvin Harrison Jr. early, and I hated every single second of it. I actually think in this specific league, I think it was actually the Apex League that you and I are in. I think I had Harrison and Kyler Murray. Not a fun year. not a fun year in that league, that's for sure. But yeah, I think it's relative. Again, it's relative to expectations. Like, to me, like, we use the phrase generational prospect way too often. If you actually just look at him from a build perspective, he's really not like this. Even though we don't have athletic testing on him, he's got sub 50th percentile arm length. Like, his wingspan is not like crazy impressive or anything. And that's why I loved him as a prospect, is that he was a true like craftsman at the position. He's almost more of like a Devontae Smith or Chris Olave type player, just like as if he ate like a Mario mushroom, like that's the type of player that he is, more so than the AJ Green or the Calvin Johnson type guys. He's not really that player. And I think that's important to sort of view him in that lens as a prospect when we're now talking about him as a pro, because I mean, Rich, the usage for him was just so tough last year. He's one of these guys that is 80% on the line of scrimmage and reception perception and 80% snaps outside. So you're just not getting any layups there. Like, you are always the X receiver. You're almost never moving around. He actually does profile very similar to like CeeDee Lamb's rookie season, but the way CeeDee Lamb has been used and developed as a player, we talked about it earlier. He's the most productive receiver out of the slot over the last two seasons. You don't get a lot of slot receiver reps with Marvin Harrison. You certainly don't get a lot of targets there. And I think it's hard to know like if that's going to change in year two, because it's the same offensive coordinator. I've done some digging on this, and you get some weird answers back, and some of which I can't share here. But I think they probably know they can't use him that way again in year two. And I would hope, just like looking at it, they know that, because Marvin Harrison Jr., I chart, in addition to routes and all that stuff, I chart like attempts in space, how often you get the ball with the ability to break a tackle in the open field. He had 4 of those in his rookie season, 10.5% of his catches for reception perception. 4 of them were an in-space attempt. That is one of the lowest marks in reception perception history. Here are the players, Rich, that are lower than that. 4 or below, there's 3. One is Mike Williams. So like that just kind of gives you the example of what we're using Marvin Harrison Jr. like, is like Mike Williams in 2019. I wouldn't really want to do that. Another one is Kenny Golladay, 2 in a small sample, not a full season sample. The other is DJ Chark, 2 in a, again, small sample. Like, it wasn't a full reception, like 8 games reception perception sample. So that's just complete outlier level stuff. Basically, anybody else that's there was like hurt or didn't play a lot of snaps. But Marvin Harrison was out there. He was playing a lot of snaps. So that, again, like you talk about fantasy-friendly role at the beginning of this show for wide receivers, he is in basically the opposite of that. On top of that, I would say that his best route was the dig route. 24.1% of his sampled routes were digs, 87.5% success rate. Kyler Murray he would be wide open, and Murray just doesn't throw there. And I think, like, not to be mean, but I think it's because he can't see them.
Oh, that's where, yeah. I
That's
did.
where
I want to bring that up too.
yeah, no, I look again. It just is what it is. It is what it is. He physically, I don't think, can see those plays from the pocket, and that's where Harrison is best used. And I've heard people I respect, like Josh Norris, saying, like, if this is going to work, it has to. The connection for Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. has to get better on these like back shoulder contested passes. I'm gonna tell you what, like I don't think that's gonna work, because that's not really the strength of Harrison's game. He was a guy that if shout out to Matt Waldman, who was the guy who really raised the alarm bells on this. I wrote it up as a minor red flag in his reception perception prospect profile, that he was just okay in contested situations as a prospect. It ended up not being a minor flaw. It ended up being a huge issue in his rookie season sample. And again, like, he can get better there. That's something that he can, just be more physical. He's definitely, I've seen pictures of him and videos of him. He's definitely more chiseled this year. I'm sure he's trying to get bigger, faster, stronger. Everybody's trying to get bigger, faster, stronger as they age, right? So he can get better in those situations, but to truly maximize a player like Harrison, who is a route runner, who's a good separator. Again, he's very crafty at the position. It's going to be on those routes like digs and in breakers and slants and stuff like that. And there was just so little of that done in his rookie season. So I'm actually pretty confident in him as an individual player being a good number one receiver in the league. And even I do think to some people, him just being a good number one receiver in the league will be a disappointment just based on the expectations and things like that. But I'm confident he can be that player. Where I'm a little stuck up is just, or hung up here is his fit with Murray and kind of some of those areas that I'm not quite sure. Is he going to be used better? Are we going to get more than 4 friggin' in-space attempts next year? We better. Are we going to get, fewer than 80% snaps on the line next year? We better, but we don't know that for sure. And I'm still kind of, man, I could not get out of my head just how many plays there were when Harrison is running an over and in breaker, and he's just not getting the ball when he's wide open.
Yeah, 0 targets at or behind the line of scrimmage last year.
I got one screen in his reception perception sample, one, and yeah, he didn't get the football thrown his way.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what I think is an interesting conversation on Marvin Harrison Jr. is the marriage of the player, the scheme, and the quarterback, like all encompassing, right? Because I don't think it's fair to just highlight one with it, because they all go together. And I also don't want to fully go down the road and fully put this label on him yet. But we did do this with Kyle Pitts every year.
Yeah.
And I don't, because one thing I go back to last year is at prospects, when I wrote up Harrison and Neighbors together as being like, wow, these guys are like 1A, 1B. Like, I could really see a team liking Neighbors more, because on tape, he's already done all the stuff that wins in the NFL right now, where the game has changed. And Harrison, you just have to believe he can. Right. Like you have to, it took a little bit more projection, because he didn't have to do those things at Ohio State. Like, he just did. Yeah. And coming into the NFL year one, he did. And I'm glad you brought up the Murray thing. So I've been having a conversation with this too, about how the defensive meta changed. Again, we bring up the too high stuff. Your grandma knows the NFL's running more too high safeties now, but these shorter quarterbacks, has it had an impact on them? We saw this absolutely kind of nuke Russell Wilson's game. Like, Russell Wilson is a big game hunter, and like, he was able to like get around some of his, air quotes, shortcomings, because, he could extend plays and he had guys that can win against man coverage. The NFL changed. They kind of took that away, and Russell Wilson like immediately kind of declined. The same thing happened when Deshaun Watson left and came back to the NFL. Deshaun Watson had a very similar, like, Russell Wilson-esque aspect to his game, where he wanted to buy time, push the ball downfield. The NFL said, we don't do that anymore. And what happened to Deshaun Watson? Played clearly the worst football we've ever seen a quarterback play the last 2 years, basically, without even getting into the weeds of anything else. Bryce Young has had a bunch of issues in the same aspect. We saw Dave Canales coach around some of that last year, and then Kyler Murray, the same thing, right? So like, I do wonder if the way the NFL defensive meta has changed, like, it does impact where the more traits-based quarterbacks, it matters again a little bit more than it did. Because we were starting to weed our way out of that, because the NFL was playing, man coverage. Matt, when we first came in and started doing, fantasy analysis heavily, you and I, the biggest thing was like shadow corner reports and like cornerback wide, and that shit has died. Like, you don't see any of that stuff, because the NFL doesn't do it anymore. Like, no one's doing that. Like, even Pat Surtain's not going around shadowing anybody. Like, it's just,
no.
So like, so you kind of have to do like this involves just a lot of projection. It's not just Harrison the player, it's Drew Petzing finding new ways to use him. And again, like we've done this with some players and we can't always assume rational coaching. The one thing that sticks out to me though, where you say like all this can work is, I don't know if you remember this, and you probably, if you charted the game, was the Miami game. And there was a report that Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison got together midweek that week. And they kind of talked about some of the things like Kyler is like, well, what are some of the things you want to be doing? Where do you want to be getting the ball? In that game, he got those in-breaking targets. He got like the crossing route stuff. And then it just never happened again. Like they just like, and it's just like, yeah, it's just like, so trying to figure out like we can get some consistency there, but it turned him into basically, like you said, a very Mike Williams-esque player, which is for fantasy purposes, which is crazy because you look at the games Marvin Harrison Jr. played last year. In his games with a touchdown, he averaged 19.4 PPR points per game. In his games without a touchdown, only 6.6 because he just had no free squares. Right. He only had one double-digit PPR game in a game without a touchdown. So like you had no floor. The only player that had a larger difference in terms of, production with a touchdown or without was Xavier Worthy. Like again, like it, and it's like, for a lead, and Xavier Worthy by and large for a chunk of the season wasn't even the lead target. So it's like,
no,
but Marvin Harrison Jr. was, and you can actually say he wasn't because of Trey McBride, but you know what I mean? Like these are two guys that are, even again, like if you're projecting the Cardinals, like these two guys are going to have around 300 targets, like by default. Like, and so you just need to get more efficient targets from Marvin Harrison. But I'm glad that you talked about that conversation. Are in these early drafts, like, are you bullish on taking him in ADP? Or are you still saying like it hasn't fallen enough?
Well, I want to go back to a couple of things that you said there, not to derail us on the big meta conversation, but a couple of things really fascinating here. I mean, this is number one, like his usage is what I would call like a sacrificial X receiver, and what I've because we talk about the NFL is moving away from this, that, and the other, as the NFL has moved away from man coverage and like trying to attack deep outside the numbers against man and some of these shadow corners and stuff. They've also moved away from the X receiver as the primary read in the concepts. It is the slot receiver. It is the Amon-Ra St. Browns and stuff like that. But in order for those guys to win, you've also got to stretch things out. You got to clear guys out. And that's where you have that X receiver who, like I said, is kind of for the love of the game, like a sacrificial player that you're just running out. But you can't have the 4th overall pick, Marvin Harrison Jr., this craftsman running like Alec Pierce routes. But that's what they did. Like Mike Williams, again, it comes back to that example. Secondly, just to come back to the short quarterback point, and I'm not trying to harp on short quarterbacks, but it's really less about like, are you short? And it's about, can you work the middle of the field? Because we talk about this and I do think some of the fact that, these two high safeties, it has forced like underneath passes. And I do think guys like I put more of a premium on players like Rashee Rice, like Chris Godwin, Amon-Ra St. Brown's like the peak of this archetype. Shoot, even a guy like Khalil Shakir over some of these vertical route runners that I've maybe over-indexed on in the past, where I still think guys like, I mean, I'll go to the grave saying like John Dotson's a good player. He just doesn't, he's not, his skill set is not valuable in today's NFL at all because he doesn't do anything after the catch and he's a small route runner. So like a lot of quarterbacks aren't going to take those throws even if they're quote open anyways. But like that type of player is more valuable. But when you really want, like if you really want to beat cover 2 and like these two high safeties, you don't dink and dunk. To quote my buddy Nate Tice at Yahoo, you put your big boy pants on, you drop back and you launch that shit over the middle of the field, which is like Harrison should be great there. But again, I think you're turning my brain like a little bit about the short quarterbacks and like they just can't see those plays. I think to his credit, Bryce Young actually is a pretty good over the middle passer. He stands out a little bit when we're comparing him to Murray, but yeah, like all these factors to answer the ADP question, all these factors have maybe kind of like mixed on him. Harrison in year 2, like I do think he theoretically fits the bill as like a good post type sleeper type player. I'm actually not like, where is his ADP at this point? Because I haven't had like a big stance, like one way or the other, honestly.
He's going like that, like wide receiver, like 16 to 20 range, like anywhere in there, like around like the Terry McLaurins, like, kind of in that same bucket. I found that he's a little bit rich for me just because there are guys that like I genuinely like in that range, a little bit more. So it's like I haven't been drafting. And again, like I said, we just got so much of the projection is just involves things that are outside of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s control. And that's the part that
Yeah.
I get hung up on is like, yeah, he can be winning. Like you said, when you're charting him, he's winning in this capacity, but he's not getting the ball. Like, it's like,
No,
that's
it's
the
tough.
problem, right? Like, so if he was already winning in this way and just, so it's like, yeah. There's things beyond him. That's what makes it tough for me to kind of invest that if he had fallen to JSN, right? Like last year, JSN had a pretty significant dip into where he was being drafted year 1 versus year 2. And it was like, yes, we can price in some of these things. Whereas we're not getting a lot of leeway with Marvin Harrison.
No.
We talked about Roma Dunze, right? In the way he was used, he's going significantly after. You're getting some of this this insulation baked in where you're still taking Marvin Harrison Jr. even in year 2, where you can say there's some flop lag here against very good players, against very good players. And there are players in that role he's being drafted before. What the hell is the difference between the way he was used last year and Cortland Sutton? And Cortland Sutton's going after him, and he's in an offense we largely more believe in,
Right.
So it's tougher, right? So it's tougher to kind of latch onto him at that ADP. But I do think if there's a dip, maybe we can come back in and maybe price point buy in there. But that's kind of where he's at. But he's gonna be a hot topic, and I think that's why having you in, because again, match charting all these year 2 guys, we were in the throes of it. Let everyone kind of know on the way out here, exactly what's going on at reception perception and Yahoo as well. I don't want to shortchange Yahoo, which obviously everyone is playing at the biggest, forum to play fantasy football.
Yeah, receptionperception.com is definitely the place to get all these year 2 profiles. They'll be dropping, like I said earlier, on May 12th. So all the guys, a lot of the guys we talked about here today definitely will be up there. All the top players from that class. The rookie class is up there, so you got to get a subscription, but I think you'll find it well worth it. And yeah, still hosting the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast 2 days a week right now. We're going to go to 1 a week here pretty soon, because your boys worked enough. So but definitely subscribe and check that out, because once we get close to the season, we'll be really ramped up there as well, and I think it's going to be a good time.
I love it. And remember too, I'm also doing a bunch of work at the site at Sharp Football Analysis, all the projections, the tiers, all this stuff, focusing on, now 2025, like you said, the season feels like it's coming sooner than later, especially once we hit 4th of July. Remember, you can use promo code SHARP5, get $5 off that draft kit, which I'll be updating and putting work into the entire summer. It's living, it's breathing, and it's ongoing until kickoff. For Matt, I'm Rich. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back for Sharp Football Fantasy.